name's Lindsay, and this is Weird. Well, greetings, weirdos. Welcome to another week of Weird. First, let's thank everyone who rated and reviewed the podcast, Dublin Sunday and K_L_P. You said such kind things, and it doesn't go unnoticed or unappreciated, so thank you so much for that. So I'm toying with the idea of adding in a tiny segment in each episode called What's Weird This Week? About something strange or odd that has happened since the last episode or in the last few weeks. So we're going to try it out and we're going to see how it goes. Truth be told, this was actually inspired by Tide, the laundry detergent, and I'm sure some of you guys can guess where I'm going with this. So what's weird this week? Well, apparently it has become trendy or cool to put Tide Pods in your mouth and then post photos or videos of it on social media. Tide is essentially saying, what the actual fuck are you even thinking? The gist is that people are daring each other to bite into the laundry packets, which obviously is dumb. Not only will it taste god-awful, but as most logical folks have pointed out, it's fucking dangerous. Side effects include irritation in the mouth, vomiting, abdominal pain, flatulence, diarrhea, burns to the skin, eyes, respiratory tract, and esophagus. Oh, and, death. Procter & Gamble, the parent company to Tide, issued a statement, presumably while rolling their eyes and thinking, I can't believe I have to say this, but I'm going to say it. The laundry packs are made to clean clothes. They should not be played with, whatever the circumstances, even if meant as a joke. Like all household cleaning products, they must be used properly and stored safely. That is a direct quote from the wisest woman in North America at the moment, Petra Rennick, Procter & Gamble spokesperson. According to the AAPCC, the American Association of Poison Control Centers have handled 39 cases of people between the ages of 13 and 19 intentionally ingesting the Tide Pods in the first 15 days of 2018. If eating Tide Pods is really a passion for you, I suggest visiting the Wake and Bake Bakery in North Carolina. They have created a Tide Pod donut in an effort to teach people the difference between what is edible and what is not. You can check out the donuts on their Instagram and Facebook, Wake and Bake Donuts, and I'll post that info in the show notes as well. If you or someone you know is eating Tide Pods, please call the National Poison Hotline right away, 1-800-222-1222, or text POISON, the substance not the band, to 797979. Oh, I feel like I need to take a palate cleanser after talking about that. I warned you guys, I'm really not funny. Okay, now on to today's episode. Allow me, if you will, to channel my inner Sophia Petrillo. Picture it, Los Angeles, 1927. A spare no-expense hotel opens to the public for the first time. Designed with pizzazz by William Banks Hanner, built in the middle of the roaring 20s, the Cecil Hotel featured opulent statuary and finishes inspired by Baroque and other Beaux Arts architectural touches. Grand entrances, sumptuous furnishings, and elegant staircases, and of course, stained glass windows. The 600-room hotel was, for a time, a trendy destination for locals and tourists. But the striking success of the Cecil would be short-lived. The stock market crashed in 1929 and unemployment would skyrocket to a cataclysmic 16.3%. The Midwest was experiencing a devastating drought, creating food shortages and an increase in costs, catastrophic for a population already struggling to make ends meet. Conditions nationwide became desperate. If any of you have ever read The Grapes of Wrath, which is one of my favorite books, seriously, John Steinbeck is a literary god. It paints a phenomenal picture of the bleakness that was enveloping America at the time. It's absolutely relentless. Every time you think that this poor family is going to get a break, like it just raises your hopes just a little bit, and then everything just kind of comes crashing down. I'm making it sound awful, and it is, but it's wonderful. Like it's a really great book. I highly recommend it. Anyway, as America sank further into its depression, the Cecil sank right along with it. The area became well known as Skid Row, occupied by drug dealers, thieves, and other questionable characters. By the 1950s, the hotel had become a budget hotel and had a reputation for housing occupants who were, shall we say, less than savory. By the 60s, the hotel had such a bad reputation for suicides that it was known plainly as the Suicide. So between the suicides, the murders, and the suggestive clientele, including infamous Satan-revering Night Stalker Richard Ramirez, it's no shock that the Cecil was rumored to be haunted or cursed, if you believe in that kind of thing. So the troubles began in 1929, when 33-year-old Dorothy Roberson had been spotted wandering the hotel after several days. I think she was wandering around for a good 3 days. And it was determined that she had overdosed on prescription medication in a foiled attempt to end her own life. Although she did not die from the overdose, this would mark the genesis of the Hotel Cecil's darkest timeline. So it's estimated that at least 16 people have died at the Cecil. For those who believe in the supernatural, the theory is that some kind of curse or supernatural phenomenon is pushing people to their final destination. I won't go into the details of all the deaths, but I've picked out a few of the notable cases to talk about today. But first, I'll quickly read the documented cases in chronological order so you get a sense of kind of the extent of what was going on there. Starting with W.K. Norton, 46, found dead November 19th, 1931. Benjamin Dodich, 25, died via a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head September 1932. Sergeant Louis D. Borden, 53, slashed his own throat with a razor, July 1934. Grace E. Magro fell from a window on the 9th story. Her body was wrapped with telephone wires. Police were unable to determine if her death was accidental or a suicide, March 1937. Marine fireman Roy Thompson, 35, jumped from the Cecil's top floor, January 1938. Navy officer Irwin C. Neblett, 39, died after ingesting poison, May 1939. Dorothy Skyger, 45, ingested poison, but it has never been verified if she actually died or not. So that's January 1940. Baby boy Purcell, we're going to talk about him more extensively in a little bit here. That happened September 1944. Robert Smith, 35, jumped from a 7th floor window, November 1947. Helen Gurney, 55, jumped from her 7th floor room window, October 22nd, 1954. Julia Frances Moore, 50, jumped from the window of her room on the 8th floor, February 11th, 1962. Pauline Otten, 27, jumped from the window of her 9th floor room. She landed on a pedestrian named George Giannini, also killing him, October 12th, 1962. Pigeon Goldie Osgood, poor Pigeon, she was found in her room. She had been raped, stabbed, and beaten to death, and her room was ransacked. The murder remains unsolved, and that happened June 4th, 1964. An unidentified woman jumped from her window on the 12th floor, December 20th, 1975. Elisa Lamb, 21, she was found February 19th, 2013, and we will be talking about her extensively. For the Canadians who are listening, if you are wondering if there is a Canadian connection in this podcast episode, yes, there is. Just you wait. And then finally, the body of a 28-year-old male was found outside the hotel. The cause of death remains unknown, June 13th, 2015. So let's rewind back to 1931. A man checks into the Cecil under the name James Willies of Chicago. A week later, on November 19th, he's found dead in his room. His real name, it turns out, is W.K. Norton, age 46, a resident of Manhattan Beach. He had ingested poisonous capsules, becoming the first known person to complete suicide at the Cecil. After this initial suicide, the Cecil between 1931 and 1943 was home to no less than 7 suicides, bringing us up to a grim September night in 1944. Dorothy woke up with a start, beads of sweat dotting her forehead, her stomach writhing in pain. Sleeping by her side was Ben, the 38-year-old shoe salesman with whom she had been having an affair. Not wanting to wake her sleeping partner, she slipped into the bathroom of her Cecil Hotel room as the pain continued to escalate. Finally, Dorothy, 19 at the time, unexpectedly gave birth to a tiny baby boy. She panics. It's 1944, Ben isn't her husband, and in fact, he's someone else's husband. She can't have a baby with him, not now. What can she do? Where can she go? What will Ben say? What will her family say? In a haze of frenzied panic, Dorothy does the unthinkable. She opens the window and throws the newborn baby boy onto the roof of the adjacent building. The infant, baby boy Purcell, does not survive the ordeal. Dorothy Purcell maintained in her testimony that she never even knew she was pregnant, and that when the boy was born, she believed him to be dead already. She was charged with murder. However, 3 psychiatrists ruled her as being mentally confused, and in January of 1945, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Many years and at least 7 deaths later, we find ourselves in February of 2013, and buckle in for this one, people. Residents of the Cecil Hotel began noticing something about the tap water. It tasted strange, foul, and the water pressure had been irregular as well. And listen, I stay in a ton of hotels because I travel a lot, and water pressure is everything. If the water pressure is off, then forget about it. Your stay at the hotel is going to be ruined. That's just me. Anyway, the hotel sent a maintenance man, Santiago Lopez, up to the water tanks to see what the problem was. Perhaps some faulty pipes in the hotel's aging plumbing system. It was a hike to get there, an elevator ride, stairs, an alarm that needed to be disarmed, and then a good 10-foot climb up a ladder to see the cistern. There were only 4 ways to get to the roof where the water tanks were, none of them easily accessible. Santiago was shocked and, dare I say, probably upset and traumatized to find floating naked in the cistern the decomposing body of 21-year-old Canadian student Elisa Lam, who had been reported as missing 3 weeks prior. With no apparent signs of trauma or sexual assault to her body, the cause of death was ruled to be accidental drowning. Nonetheless, rumors of the hotel's sinister soul continued to circulate. Elisa had been traveling in the States and habitually contacted her parents in British Columbia each day. Her parents contacted the police January 31st, 2013, when Elisa didn't phone them as she normally would. Witnesses stated that she had been seen that day and she seemed happy and cheerful and was excited to be purchasing gifts and souvenirs for her family back home. By February 6th, a full investigation had been launched. Posters, police dogs, searches, all of it. But the trail had seemingly gone cold. Eventually, the police released surveillance footage from the hotel elevator showing Elisa behaving strangely, waving her arms, acting as though she saw something that wasn't there, hiding in the corners of the elevator. Some believe that she was seeing a ghostly apparition or some kind of demonic being. However, it's important to recognize and understand that Elisa was being medicated for bipolar disorder. You may or may not be familiar with what bipolar disorder looks like, but here's an excerpt from the DSM-5. That's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. It's the 5th edition, which is the most updated edition. This is essentially the Bible of psychiatric disorders that all professionals in the field use as a diagnostic tool. And it says, bipolar and related disorders are separated from the depressive disorders in DSM-5 and placed between the chapters on schizophrenia, spectrum, and other psychotic disorders and depressive disorders in recognition of their place as a bridge between the 2 diagnostic classes in terms of symptomatology, family, history, and genetics. So the reason why I read that blurb specifically is because bipolar disorder can include a number of presenting problems, and some of these can include symptoms that appear psychotic or akin to schizophrenic. So although what Elisa was demonstrating in the footage may appear ominous or non-corporeal, it's entirely possible that the behavior is in line with her diagnosis. The lifetime suicide rate in individuals with bipolar disorder is estimated to be at least 15 times that of the general population. Bipolar may account for at minimum 1/4 of completed suicides. So, okay, I'm going to go on a bit of a rant here, and it's all going to circle back to Elisa, I promise. And if you're not into rats or rabbit trails, that's totally fine because it's my podcast and I'll rant if I want to. It's my podcast and I'll rant if I want to. Although I probably shouldn't sing if I want to keep listeners. Anyway, I would love it if you kept listening, but here's the thing. I call this podcast weird because I like things that are considered kind of strange, folklore, the macabre, storytelling, true crime, things that people have experienced that are perhaps considered out of the ordinary. But something that's not weird is mental illness. And the reason I say that is because it's estimated that at least as many as 1 in 3 Canadians will struggle with a mental illness at some point in their lifetime. It's still highly stigmatized because it's still highly misunderstood, even though a significant portion of the population will need to deal with it at some point in their lifetime. Although I find it fun and interesting to talk about the Cecil Hotel being haunted or cursed, etc., the bottom line, like in my humble opinion, is that it's no different than, say, Niagara Falls, which has claimed over 5,000 lives since 1850, approximately 20 to 40 suicides being completed each year, meaning it's just one of those places that people have flocked to for their last moments. And though unsurprisingly, the Niagara region is saturated with supernatural lore as well, but I digress. So it's safe to say that even if you personally aren't struggling with something, chances are that someone that you love is. So if you're in Canada and you're looking for help, or you know someone who's looking for help, check out cmha.ca, that's the Canadian Mental Health Association. And if you're in the States, hit up Mental Health America at mentalhealthamerica.net for information and resources. So back to Elisa. I can't claim to know the severity of her illness. There's several diagnoses within bipolar disorder, such as bipolar 1, bipolar 2, cyclothymic disorder, and other unspecified bipolar-related disorders, each with varying diagnostic traits. So I've never assessed her personally. I can't speak to her diagnostic features, her presenting concerns, or if there's any comorbidity involved. Her family had kept her history of mental health concerns quite confidential, so there's not a ton of available information online about her presenting concerns. Although the family does maintain that she did not have a history of suicidal ideations. She was taking Wellbutrin, Lamictal, Suriquilend, and Effexor, but from what I can tell, there shouldn't have been any synergistic or antagonistic effects to that extreme. But it's difficult to assess, not knowing her in person. And I know I've said that like a million times already, but that is really important. The side effects of these drug interactions include dizziness, impairment of judgment, and difficulty concentrating. And these prescriptions should never ever be combined with alcohol. The autopsy report did reveal that she had some minute traces of alcohol in her system, which may or may not mean anything in this case. Again, I don't know her, and medications can have varying effects on different people, but what I can say is that psychotic features can be present in people who are coping with bipolar disorder. It's a possibility. Another theory that began to circulate was that Elisa may have been suffering from tuberculosis. There had been a rise of TB cases in that area. However, tests did not reveal that she had anything of the sort. Although what I find to be particularly strange is that the clinical test, this is real, the clinical test used to identify tuberculosis is actually called the Lam-Elisa, which I know it's like a huge coincidence, but oh, holy shit, that's kind of creepy. So Elisa, while alive, she maintained a Tumblr blog. Post-mortem, the blog continued to be updated, and as creepy as that sounds, it's possible that she had scheduled posts in advance to be published. It's a handy feature on most social media platforms. That said, her phone was never found. It wasn't on her body, and it wasn't found in her room. So it's difficult to say conclusively what the source of those posts were and whether or not they have any kind of association with her death. Although you would think that Tumblr would be able to identify if the posts were published in advance or not. I don't know. I mean, if I post something in Facebook and I schedule it to be posted later, like the notification will say that it was a scheduled post. But this was a few years ago, so I don't know. I'd have to find out. The autopsy reports have also been debated. It's unclear if the rape and the fingernail kits were processed, and the report also noted that there was subcutaneous pooling in her anal area. So this does lend to speculation about sexual assault, but pathologists have also noted that this can happen as a result of decomposition, and her body was bloated and decomposing in that water for quite a while. That water that people were drinking, by the way, by the time she was discovered. So that pooling may or may not mean anything in terms of how she died or how she got there. Initially, her death was ruled as accidental, but at some point after that ruling, the autopsy report, was altered to read as the death being undetermined. But then it was changed back to accidental. So there's been a lot of things to consider when formulating a theory or hypothesis about what happened to poor Elisa Lam. Now, I understand that some of you may be curious about the elevator footage, and it is readily available online. I touched on this in episode 1 about Clifford Olson. There's just some things that I feel they're not to be consumed for entertainment, and that video of her is one of them. And I'm coming from this from the perspective of trying to be empathetic to the parents, and if I had a daughter, had died so tragically and so mysteriously, but her last moments were captured on film, and these were her last moments, and people were watching it thinking it's kind of kooky or crazy or whatever. Like, I can't imagine how much distress that would add to an already heartbreaking situation. So I haven't put it up in the show notes for that reason. Okay, moving on. That's about it for Elisa at the moment. Now we're going to jump back to 1947 again, where there's unsubstantiated reports that indicate that Elizabeth Short was last seen having a drink at the Cecil's bar shortly before her murder in January of 1947. Who is Elizabeth Short, you may ask? Some of you may know her by the more popular name, the Black Dahlia. It's a notorious unsolved murder case that has spawned numerous theories, novels, fan fiction, a feature film, and a substantial cult following. Elizabeth was found the morning of January 15th, 1947, by a mother taking her child for a walk. Her body had been sliced in half at the waist, and there was extensive mutilation to the body. There was no blood on the ground around her, which implies that Elizabeth had been moved from the kill site and placed where she was found. Opinions about whether or not Elizabeth had her last drink at the Cecil are varied, so it's difficult to differentiate between fact and folklore in this case. LA crime historian Kim Cooper does believe that this account is false. So take it for what you will. All right, so that's sort of the summary of the gruesome deaths associated with the Cecil Hotel. But wait, there's more. Not only was the hotel the scene of several deaths, it was also home to 2 notable serial killers. Some of you may be familiar with Richard Ramirez, aka the Night Stalker, and I won't go into a ton of detail about him because he warrants his own episode altogether. Seriously, the story about how he got caught is, spoiler alert, he gets caught. That story is pretty much the greatest criminal apprehension story I have ever heard in my life. Don't Google it though, because I want to tell it to you. All right, so Richard Ramirez, who lived at the Cecil in 1985, was a famous serial killer operating in California in the 80s. He was difficult to catch because his MO, or lack thereof, was erratic. No one was safe from this guy. Many serial killers will only victimize a certain type. For example, some will only kill gay men, or some will only kill blonde women, or whatever, you get the idea. Richard went after men, women, children, elderly people. It didn't matter race, color, creed, anything like that. He was terrifyingly indiscriminate. He also used a number of different weapons, which also contributed to the difficulty in just figuring out who this guy was. It's said that Richard resided at the Cecil while he was wreaking havoc in Los Angeles. It was essentially his home base. Ramirez was a professed Satanist who was highly sadistic. He showed no remorse for his crimes. In fact, here's another spoiler alert about Richard, when he was sentenced to death, he stated, "No big deal. Death comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." Oh, that's charming. He was ultimately convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assaults, 14 burglaries, and a partridge in a pear tree. We'll definitely be talking about him more at some point. So you'd think that lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. Serial killers are rare, and having two residing in the same place is even rarer, you'd think, but apparently not at the Cecil, which in 1991 became the residence of Jack Unterweger. Who is Jack Unterweger, you may or may not be asking? Well, I'll tell you who Jack Unterweger is. Jack Unterweger, aka the Vienna Strangler, was an Austrian writer who had penned magazine articles and, dear God, children's books. He went to the Cecil to write an article about crime in LA. It turns out dear Jack had a passion for strangling prostitutes, a pastime that he had also been involved with back home in Austria. He would scope out areas with a high concentration of prostitutes by going on ride-alongs, dubbed as research for his magazine articles with the LAPD. Eventually, it came to light that Jack had been strangling prostitutes since his youth and had actually spent time in prison as a young man for choking a woman to death with her own bra. So permit me another quick rant here. Okay, prostitutes are people. There's no such thing as she's asking for it or it's her fault for being in that position to begin with. Sorry, no. That is not a thing. I don't care if you're a sex worker or a sales rep at Sephora. Everyone deserves to be safe where they work, and no one deserves to be sexually assaulted and strangled. Often these murders take forever to solve because the people don't notice or don't care that these poor girls go missing, and it's not okay. Robert Pickton is an infamous example of this, and I'm sure we'll cover him in an episode at some point as well in the future. I've said that a whole bunch of times today. Lots of show ideas. Okay, moving swiftly along. Jack was eventually convicted of 11 murders and sent to prison with no chance of parole. Again, keeping the details late because future episodes. So, if you haven't guessed it already, season 5 of American Horror Story was inspired, at least in part, by the Cecil Hotel. And judging by the hotel's history, American Story was definitely not suffering from a lack of source material. That said, not everyone found this inspiration to be all that palatable. Vice magazine recently published, well, when I say recently, they did it in 2015, an article quoting Becky Dennison. She's the co-director of the LA Community Action Network, and she cited her concerns about the stigma created in regards to low-income and long-term tenants. The article reads, it's pretty offensive actually that American Horror Story bases their season on the Cecil Hotel, said Dennison, whose organization advocates on behalf of Skid Row's most vulnerable residents. She said the hotel has historically served as homes for the elderly and the disabled and very low-income people. One incident, referring to Elisa's death, doesn't change that, and certainly not the mythology of American Horror Story. It's ridiculous. Aside from its sordid past, which already kind of lends itself to ethereal interpretations, visitors have reported hearing strange noises, objects moving in the night, unsettling figures shifting about in the dark shadows, which is admittedly really no different from any other hotel I've ever stayed at. Guests at the Cecil have also reported seeing the ghost of a young boy occupying a window on the 4th floor. So what's happening with the Cecil now? The Los Angeles City Council in 2017 deemed that the Cecil is a historic cultural monument because of its representation of early 20th century American architecture. In 2011, it was rebranded as the Stay on Main and then sold in 2014 to a hotelier from New York. A $100 million redevelopment project is currently underway with plans to relaunch and reopen the hotel in 2019. So if you want to go on vacation in LA, you can stay there as of 2019. It will be complete with a rooftop pool, and I can't see anything going wrong with that. And that, weirdos, is the story of the Cecil Hotel. If you want to chat about it more, or if you have story ideas you'd like to share, you can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, The Weird Pod. And that's the same as the website as well, www.theweirdpod.com. If you liked what you heard and you'd like to hear more, please rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Google, Podbean, all that fun stuff. And until next week, thank you for listening. Remember, stay weird.